From the Innocents Abroad, 1867-68, by Mark Twain. At certain periods, it becomes the dearest ambition of a man to keep a faithful record of his performances in a book, and he dashes at his work with an enthusiasm that imposes on him the notion that keeping a journal is the veriest pastime in the world and the pleasantest. But if he only lives 21 days, he will find out that only those rare natures that are made up of pluck, endurance, devotion to duty for duty's sake, and invincible determination may hope to venture upon so tremendous an enterprise as the keeping of a journal and not sustain a shameful defeat. If you wish to inflict a heartless and malignant punishment upon a young person, pledge him to keep a journal a year. And the last night of the 7 was the stormiest of all. There was no thunder, no noise but the pounding bows of the ship, the keen whistling of the gale through the cordage, and the rush of the seething waters. But the vessel climbed aloft as if she would climb to heaven, then paused an instant that seemed a century, and plunged headlong down again as from a precipice. The sheeted sprays drenched the decks like rain. The blackness of darkness was everywhere. At long intervals, a flash of lightning clove it with a quivering line of fire that revealed a heaving world of water where was nothing before, kindled the dusky cordage to glittering silver, and lit up the faces of the men with a ghastly luster. Fear drove many on deck that were used to avoiding the night winds and the spray. Some thought the vessel could not live through the night, and it seemed less dreadful to stand out in the midst of the wild tempest and see the peril that threatened than to be shut up in the sepulchral cabins under the dim lamps and imagine the horrors that were abroad on the ocean. And once out, once where they could see the ship struggling in the strong grasp of the storm, once where they could hear the shriek of the winds and face the driving spray and look out upon the majestic picture the lightnings disclosed, they were prisoners to a fierce fascination they could not resist, and so remained. It was a wild night, and a very, very long one. While we stood admiring the cloud-capped peaks and the lowlands robed in misty gloom, a finer picture burst upon us and chained every eye like a magnet, a stately ship, with canvas piled on canvas till she was one towering mass of bellying sail. She came speeding over the sea like a great bird. Africa and Spain were forgotten. All homage was for the beautiful stranger. While everybody gazed, she swept superbly by and flung the stars and stripes to the breeze. Quicker than thought, hats and handkerchiefs flashed in the air, and a cheer went up. She was beautiful before, she was radiant now. Many a one on her decks knew then, for the first time, how tame a sight his country's flag is at home, compared with what it is in a foreign land. To see it is to see a vision of home itself and all its idols, and feel a thrill that would stir a very river of sluggish blood. What a funny old town it is. It seems like profanation to laugh and jest and bandy the frivolous chat of our day amid its hoary relics. Only the stately phraseology and the measured speech of the sons of the prophet are suited to a venerable antiquity like this. Here is a crumbling wall that was old when Columbus discovered America, was old when Peter the Hermit roused the knightly men of the Middle Ages to arm for the First Crusade, was old when Charlemagne and his paladins beleaguered enchanted castles and battled with giants and genii in the fabled days of the olden time, was old when Christ and his disciples walked the earth, stood where it stands today when the lips of Memnon were vocal, and men bought and sold in the streets of ancient Thebes. I will conclude this chapter with a remark that I am sincerely proud to be able to make, and glad, as well, that my comrades cordially endorse it, to wit, by far the handsomest women we have seen in France were born and reared in America. I feel now like a man who has redeemed a failing reputation and shed luster upon a dimmed escutcheon by a single just deed done at the 11th hour. Let the curtain fall to slow music. It is hard to forget repulsive things. I remember yet how I ran off from school once when I was a boy, and then, pretty late at night, concluded to climb into the window of my father's office and sleep on a lounge, because I had a delicacy about going home and getting thrashed. As I lay on the lounge and my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, I fancied I could see a long, dusky, shapeless thing stretched upon the floor. A cold shiver went through me. I turned my face to the wall. That did not answer. I was afraid that the thing would creep over and seize me in the dark. I turned back and stared at it for minutes and minutes, they seemed hours. It appeared to me that the lagging moonlight never would get to it. I turned to the wall and counted 20 to pass the feverish time away. I looked, the pale square was nearer. I turned again and counted 50, it was almost touching it. With desperate will I turned again and counted 100 and faced about, all in a tremble. A white human hand lay in the moonlight, such an awful sinking at the heart, such a sudden gasp for breath. I cannot tell what I felt. When I recovered strength enough, I faced the wall again. But no boy could have remained so, with that mysterious hand behind him. I counted again and looked. The most of a naked arm was exposed. I put my hands over my eyes and counted until I could stand it no longer, and then the pallid face of a man was there, with the corners of the mouth drawn down and the eyes fixed and glassy in death. I raised to a sitting posture and glowered on the corpse till the light crept down the bare breast, line by line, inch by inch past the nipple, and then it disclosed a ghastly stab. I went away from there. I do not say that I went away in any sort of a hurry, but I simply went. That is sufficient. I went out at the window, and I carried the sash along with me. I did not need the sash, but it was handier to take it than it was to leave it, and so I took it. I was not scared, but I was considerably agitated. When I reached home, they whipped me, but I enjoyed it. It seemed perfectly delightful. That man had been stabbed near the office that afternoon, and they carried him in there to doctor him, but he only lived an hour. I have slept in the same room with him often, since then, in my dreams. We saw a manuscript of Virgil, with annotations in the handwriting of Petrarch, the gentleman who loved another man's Laura and lavished upon her all through life a love which was a clear waste of the raw material. It was sound sentiment, but bad judgment. It brought both parties fame and created a fountain of commiseration for them in sentimental breasts that is running yet. But who says a word in behalf of poor Mr. Laura? I do not know his other name. Who glorifies him? Who bedews him with tears? Who writes poetry about him? Nobody. How do you suppose he liked the state of things that has given the world so much pleasure? Let the world go on fretting about Laura and Petrarch if it will. But as for me, my tears and my lamentations shall be lavished upon the unsung defendant. We saw also an autograph letter of Lucrezia Borgia, a lady for whom I have always entertained the highest respect, on account of her rare histrionic capabilities, her opulence in solid gold, goblets made of gilded wood, her high distinction as an operatic screamer, and the facility with which she could order a sextuple funeral and get the corpses ready for it. We saw one single coarse yellow hair from Lucrezia's head likewise. It awoke emotions, but we still live. In this same library, we saw some drawings by Michelangelo. These Italians call him Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. They spell it Vinci and pronounce it Vinci. Foreigners always spell better than they pronounce. We reserve our opinion of these sketches. Just in this one matter lies the main charm of life in Europe, comfort. In America, we hurry, which is well. But when the day's work is done, we go on thinking of losses and gains. We plan for the morrow. We even carry our business cares to bed with us, and toss and worry over them when we ought to be restoring our racked bodies and brains with sleep. We burn up our energies with these excitements, and either die early or drop into a lean and mean old age at a time of life, which they call a man's prime in Europe. When an acre of ground has produced long and well, we let it lie fallow and rest for a season. We take no man clear across the continent in the same coach he started in. The coach is stabled somewhere on the plains, and its heated machinery allowed to cool for a few days. When a razor has seen long service and refuses to hold an edge, the barber lays it away for a few weeks, and the edge comes back of its own accord. We bestow thoughtful care upon inanimate objects, but none upon ourselves. What a robust people, what a nation of thinkers we might be, if we would only lay ourselves on the shelf occasionally and renew our edges. I do envy these Europeans the comfort they take. When the work of the day is done, they forget it. It was a long, long ride, but toward evening, as we sat silent and hardly conscious of where we were, subdued into that meditative calm that comes so surely after a conversational storm, someone shouted, "Venice!" And sure enough, afloat on the placid sea a league away, lay a great city with its towers and domes and steeples drowsing in a golden midst of sunset. The venerable mother of the republics is scarce a fit subject for flippant speech or the idle gossiping of tourists. It seems a sort of sacrilege to disturb the glamour of old romance that pictures her to us softly from afar off as through a tinted mist, and curtains her ruin and her desolation from our view. One ought, indeed, to turn away from her rags, her poverty, and her humiliation, and think of her only as she was when she sunk the fleets of Charlemagne, when she humbled Frederick Barbarossa, or waved her victorious banners above the battlements of Constantinople. There was music everywhere, choruses, string bands, brass bands, flutes, everything. I was so surrounded, walled in with music, magnificence, and loveliness, that I became inspired with the spirit of the scene and sang one tune myself. However, when I observed that the other gondolas had sailed away, and my gondolier was preparing to go overboard, I stopped. In the glare of the day, there is little poetry about Venice, but under the charitable moon, her stained palaces are white again, their battered sculptures are hidden in shadows, and the old city seems crowned once more with the grandeur that was hers 500 years ago. It is easy, then, in fancy, to people these silent canals with plumed gallants and fair ladies, with Shylocks in gabardine and sandals, venturing loans upon the rich argosies of Venetian commerce, with Othellos and Desdemonas, with Agos and Rodrigos, with noble fleets and victorious legions returning from the wars. In the treacherous sunlight we see Venice decayed, forlorn, poverty-stricken, and commerceless, forgotten and utterly insignificant. But in the moonlight, her 14 centuries of greatness fling their glories about her, and once more is she the princeliest among the nations of the earth. Yes, I think we have seen all Venice. We have seen in these old churches a profusion of costly and elaborate sepulchre ornamentation, such as we never dreamt of before. We have stood in the dim religious light of these hoary sanctuaries, in the midst of long ranks of dusty monuments and effigies of the great dead of Venice, until we seemed drifting back into the solemn past, and looking upon the scenes and mingling with the people of a remote antiquity. We have been in a half-waking sort of a dream all the time. I do not know how else to describe the feeling. A part of our being has remained still in the 19th century, while another part of it has seemed in some unaccountable way walking among the phantoms of the 10th. We have seen famous pictures until our eyes are weary with looking at them and refuse to find interest in them any longer. We have striven hard to learn. We have had some success. We have mastered some things, possibly of trifling import in the eyes of the learned, but to us they give pleasure, and we take as much pride in our little acquirements as do others who have learned far more, and we love to display them full as well. When we see a monk going about with a lion and looking tranquilly up to heaven, we know that that is St. Mark. When we see a monk with a book and a pen, looking tranquilly up to heaven, trying to think of a word, we know that that is St. Matthew. When we see a monk sitting on a rock, looking tranquilly up to heaven, with a human skull beside him, and without other baggage, we know that that is St. Jerome, because we know that he always went flying light in the matter of baggage. When we see a party looking tranquilly up to heaven, unconscious that his body is shot through and through with arrows, we know that that is St. Sebastian. When we see other monks looking tranquilly up to heaven, but having no trademark, we always ask who those parties are. We do this because we humbly wish to learn. And so, having satisfied ourselves, we depart tomorrow, and leave the venerable Queen of the Republics to summon her vanished ships, and marshal her shadowy armies, and know again in dreams the pride of her old renown. The baptistry, which is a few years older than the Leaning Tower, is a stately rotunda of huge dimensions, and was a costly structure. In it hangs the lamp whose measured swing suggested to Galileo the pendulum. It looked an insignificant thing to have conferred upon the world of science and mechanics such a mighty extension of their dominions as it has. Pondering in its suggestive presence, I seemed to see a crazy universe of swinging discs, the toiling children of this sedate parent. He appeared to have an intelligent expression about him of knowing that he was not a lamp at all, that he was a pendulum disguised, for prodigious and inscrutable purposes of his own deep devising, and not a common pendulum either, but the old original patriarchal pendulum, the Abraham pendulum of the world. How times have changed between the older ages and the new. Some 17 or 18 centuries ago, the ignorant men of Rome were wont to put Christians in the arena of the Colosseum yonder and turn the wild beasts in upon them for show. It was for a lesson as well. It was to teach the people to abhor and fear the new doctrine the followers of Christ were teaching. The beasts tore the victims limb from limb and made poor mangled corpses of them in the twinkling of an eye. But when the Christians came into power, when the Holy Mother Church became mistress of the barbarians, she taught them the error of their ways by no such means. No, she put them in this pleasant inquisition and pointed to the blessed Redeemer, who was so gentle and so merciful toward all men, and they urged the barbarians to love him, and they did all they could to persuade them to love and honor him, first by twisting their thumbs out of joint with a screw, then by nipping their flesh with pincers, red-hot ones, because they are the most comfortable in cold weather, then by skinning them alive a little, and finally by roasting them in public. They always convinced those barbarians. The true religion, properly administered, as the good Mother Church used to administer it, is very, very soothing. It is wonderfully persuasive also. There is a great difference between feeding parties to wild beasts and stirring up their finer feelings in an inquisition. One is the system of degraded barbarians, the other of enlightened civilized people. It is a great pity the playful inquisition is no more. I never felt so fervently thankful, so soothed, so tranquil, so filled with a blessed peace, as I did yesterday when I learned that Michelangelo was dead. But we have taken it out of this guide. He has marched us through miles of pictures and sculpture in the vast corridors of the Vatican, and through miles of pictures and sculpture in 20 other palaces. He has shown us the great picture in the Sistine Chapel, and frescoes enough to fresco the heavens, pretty much all done by Michelangelo. So with him, we have played that game which has vanquished so many guides for us, imbecility and idiotic questions. These creatures never suspect. They have no idea of a sarcasm. He shows us a figure and says, "Statu bronzo, bronze statue." We look at it indifferently, and the doctor asks, "By Michelangelo?" "No, not know who." Then he shows us the ancient Roman Forum. The doctor asks, "Michelangelo?" A stare from the guide, "No, 1,000 years before he is born." Then an Egyptian obelisk, again, "Michelangelo." "Oh mon Dieu, gentlemen, this is 2,000 years before he is born." He grows so tired of that unceasing question sometimes that he dreads to show us anything at all. The wretch has tried all the ways he can think of to make us comprehend that Michelangelo is only responsible for the creation of a part of the world, but somehow he has not succeeded yet. Relief for overtasked eyes and brain from study and sightseeing is necessary, or we shall become idiotic, sure enough. Therefore this guide must continue to suffer. If he does not enjoy it, so much the worse for him. We do. In this place, I might as well jot down a chapter concerning those necessary nuisances, European guides. Many a man has wished in his heart he could do without his guide, but knowing he could not, has wished he could get some amusement out of him as a remuneration for the affliction of his society. We accomplished this latter matter, and if our experience can be made useful to others, they are welcome to it. Guides know about enough English to tangle everything up so that a man can make neither head nor tail of it. They know their story by heart, the history of every statue, painting, cathedral, or other wonder they show you. They know it and tell it as a parrot would, and if you interrupt and throw them off the track, they have to go back and begin over again. All their lives long, they are employed in showing strange things to foreigners and listening to their bursts of admiration. It is human nature to take delight in exciting admiration. It is what prompts children to say smart things and to do absurd ones, and in other ways show off when company is present. It is what makes gossips turn out in rain and storm to go and be the first to tell a startling bit of news. Think then what a passion it becomes with a guide, whose privilege it is, every day, to show to strangers wonders that throw them into perfect ecstasies of admiration. He gets so that he could not by any possibility live in a soberer atmosphere. After we discovered this, we never went into ecstasies any more. We never admired anything. We never showed any but impassible faces and stupid indifference in the presence of the sublimest wonders a guide had to display. We had found their weak point. We have made good use of it ever since. We have made some of those people savage at times, but we have never lost our own serenity. The doctor asks the questions, generally, because he can keep his countenance and look more like an inspired idiot and throw more imbecility into the tone of his voice than any man that lives. It comes natural to him. The guides in Genoa are delighted to secure an American party because Americans have so much wonder and deal so much in sentiment and emotion before any relic of Columbus. Our guide there fidgeted about as if he had swallowed a spring mattress. He was full of animation, full of impatience. He said, "Come, wise me, gentlemen, come, I show you the letter writing by Christopher Colombo. Write it himself, write it wise his own hand, come." He took us to the municipal palace. After much impressive fumbling of keys and opening of locks, the stained and aged document was spread before us. The guide's eyes sparkled. He danced about us and tapped the parchment with his finger. "What I tell you, gentlemen, is it not so? See, handwriting Christopher Colombo, write it himself." We looked indifferent, unconcerned. The doctor examined the document very deliberately during a painful pause. Then he said, without any show of interest, "Ah, Ferguson, what did you say was the name of the party who wrote this?" "Christopher Colombo, the great Christopher Colombo." Another deliberate examination. "Ah, did he write it himself, or how?" "He write it himself, Christopher Colombo. His own handwriting, write by himself." Then the doctor laid the document down and said, "Why, I have seen boys in America only 14 years old that could write better than that. But this is the great Christo. I don't care who it is, it's the worst writing I ever saw. Now you mustn't think you can impose on us because we are strangers. We are not fools by a good deal. If you have got any specimens of penmanship of real merit, trot them out. And if you haven't, drive on." We drove on. The guide was considerably shaken up, but he made one more venture. He had something which he thought would overcome us. He said, "Ah, gentlemen, you come wise me. I show you beautiful, oh, magnificent bust Christopher Colombo. Splendid, grand, magnificent." He brought us before the beautiful bust, for it was beautiful, and sprang back and struck an attitude. "Ah, look, gentlemen, beautiful, grand, bust Christopher Colombo, beautiful bust, beautiful pedestal." The doctor put up his eyeglass, procured for such occasions. "Ah, what did you say this gentleman's name was?" "Christopher Colombo, the great Christopher Colombo." "Christopher Colombo, the great Christopher Colombo. Well, what did he do?" Discover America, oh, the devil." Discover America, no, that statement will hardly wash. We are just from America ourselves. We heard nothing about it. Christopher Colombo, pleasant name, is he dead? "Oh, corpo di Bacco, 300 years." "What did he die of?" "I do not know, I cannot tell." "Smallpox, think." "I do not know, gentlemen, I do not know what he die of." "Measles, likely." Maybe, I do not know, I think he die of somethings." "Parents living." "Impossible." "Ah, which is the bust, and which is the pedestal?" "Santa Maria, this the bust, this the pedestal." "Ah, I see, happy combination, very happy combination, indeed. Is this the first time this gentleman was ever on a bust?" That joke was lost on the foreigner. Guides cannot master subtleties of the American joke. We have made it interesting for this Roman guide. Yesterday we spent 3 or 4 hours in the Vatican again, that wonderful world of curiosities. We came very near expressing interest, sometimes even admiration. It was very hard to keep from it. We succeeded, though. Nobody else ever did in the Vatican museums. The guide was bewildered, nonplussed. He walked his legs off nearly, hunting up extraordinary things, and exhausted all his ingenuity on us, but it was a failure. We never showed any interest in anything. He had reserved what he considered to be his greatest wonder till the last, a royal Egyptian mummy, the best preserved in the world, perhaps. He took us there. He felt so sure, this time, that some of his old enthusiasm came back to him. "See, gentlemen, mummy, mummy." The eyeglass came up as calmly, as deliberately as ever. "Ah, Ferguson, what did I understand you to say the gentleman's name was?" "Names, he got no name, mummy, Egyptian mummy." "Yes, yes, born here." "No, Egyptian mummy." "Ah, just so, Frenchman, I presume." "No's not Frenchman, not Roman, born in Egypta." "Born in Egypta, never heard of Egypta before." "Foreign locality, likely, mummy, mummy." "How calm he is, how self-possessed." Is he dead?" "Osaka blue, been dead 3,000 year." The doctor turned on him savagely. "Here now, what do you mean by such conduct as this? Playing us for Chinamen because we are strangers and trying to learn, trying to impose your vile second-hand carcasses on us. Thunder and lightning, I've a notion too, if you've got a nice fresh corpse, fetch him out, or by George, we'll brain you." We make it exceedingly interesting for this Frenchman. However, he has paid us back, partly without knowing it. He came to the hotel this morning to ask if we were up, and he endeavored as well as he could to describe us, so that the landlord would know which persons he meant. He finished with the casual remark that we were lunatics. The observation was so innocent and so honest that it amounted to a very good thing for a guide to say. There is one remark, already mentioned, which never yet has failed to disgust these guides. We use it always, when we can think of nothing else to say. After they have exhausted their enthusiasm pointing out to us and praising the beauties of some ancient bronze image or broken-legged statue, we look at it stupidly and in silence for 5, 10, 15 minutes, as long as we can hold out, in fact, and then ask, Is he dead?" When I was a schoolboy and was to have a new knife, I could not make up my mind as to which was the prettiest in the showcase, and I did not think any of them were particularly pretty, and so I chose with a heavy heart. But when I looked at my purchase, at home, where no glittering blades came into composition with it, I was astonished to see how handsome it was. To this day my new hats look better out of the shop than they did in it, with other new hats. It begins to dawn upon me now that possibly what I have been taking for uniform ugliness in the galleries may be uniform beauty after all. I honestly hope it is to others, but certainly it is not to me. Perhaps the reason I used to enjoy going to the Academy of Fine Arts in New York was because there were but a few hundred paintings in it, and it did not surfeit me to go through the list. I suppose the Academy was bacon and beans in the 40-mile desert, and a European gallery is a state dinner of 13 courses. One leaves no sign after him of the one dish, but the 13 frighten away his appetite and give him no satisfaction. There is one thing I am certain of, though. With all the Michelangelos, the Raphaels, the Guidos, and the other old masters, the sublime history of Rome remains unpainted. They painted virgins enough, and popes enough, and saintly scarecrows enough, to people paradise almost, and these things are all they did paint. Nero fiddling o'er burning Rome, the assassination of Caesar, the stirring spectacle of 100,000 people bending forward with rapt interest, in the Colosseum, to see two skillful gladiators hacking away each other's lives, a tiger springing upon a kneeling martyr. These and 1,000 other matters which we read of with a living interest must be sought for only in books, not among the rubbish left by the old masters, who are no more. I have the satisfaction of informing the public. Everywhere you see things that make you wonder how old these old houses were before the night of destruction came, things, too, which bring back those long-dead inhabitants and place them living before your eyes. For instance, the steps, 2 feet thick, lava blocks, that lead up out of the school, and the same kind of steps that lead up into the dress circle of the principal theater, are almost worn through. For ages the boys hurried out of that school, and for ages their parents hurried into that theater, and the nervous feet that have been dust, and ashes for 18 centuries have left their record for us to read today. I imagined I could see crowds of gentlemen and ladies thronging into the theater, with tickets for secured seats in their hands, and on the wall I read the imaginary placard, in infamous grammar, "Positively no free list, except members of the press." Hanging about the doorway, I fancied, were slouchy Pompeian street boys uttering slang and profanity and keeping a wary eye out for checks. I entered the theater and sat down in one of the long rows of stone benches in the dress circle and looked at the place for the orchestra and the ruined stage and around at the wide sweep of empty boxes and thought to myself, this house won't pay. I tried to imagine the music in full blast, the leader of the orchestra beating time, and the versatile so-and-so, who had just returned from a most successful tour in the provinces to play his last and farewell engagement of positively 6 nights only in Pompeii previous to his departure for Herculaneum, charging around the stage and piling the agony mountains high. But I could not do it with such a house as that. Those empty benches tied my fancy down to dull reality. I said, these people that ought to be here have been dead, and still, and mouldering to dust for ages and ages, and will never care for the trifles and follies of life any more forever. Owing to circumstances, etc., etc., there will not be any performance tonight. Close down the curtains. Put out the lights. After browsing among the stately ruins of Rome, of Baiae, of Pompeii, and after glancing down the long marble ranks of battered and nameless imperial heads that stretch down the corridors of the Vatican, one thing strikes me with a force it never had before: the unsubstantial, unlasting character of fame. Men lived long lives in the olden time and struggled feverishly through them, toiling like slaves in oratory, in generalship, or in literature, and then laid them down and died, happy in the possession of an enduring history and a deathless name. Well, 20 little centuries flutter away, and what is left of these things? A crazy inscription on a block of stone, which snuffy antiquaries bother over and tangle up, and make nothing out of but a bare name, which they spell wrong. No history, no tradition, no poetry, nothing that can give it even a passing interest. What may be left of General Grant's great name 40 centuries hence? This, in the encyclopedia for A, possibly. Uriah S. or Z. Grant, popular poet of ancient times in the Aztec provinces of the United States of British America. Some authors say flourished about A, but the learned Ah Fufu states that he was a contemporary of Shakespeare, the English poet, and flourished about A, some 3 centuries after the Trojan War instead of before it. He wrote, "Rock me to sleep, mother. These thoughts sadden me, I will to bed." The full moon was riding high in the cloudless heavens now. We sauntered carelessly and unthinkingly to the edge of the lofty battlements of the citadel and looked down a vision, and such a vision, Athens by moonlight. The prophet that thought the splendors of the New Jerusalem were revealed to him surely saw this instead. It lay in the level plain right under our feet, all spread abroad like a picture, and we looked down upon it as we might have looked from a balloon. We saw no semblance of a street, but every house, every window, every clinging vine, every projection was as distinct and sharply marked as if the time were noonday. And yet there was no glare, no glitter, nothing harsh or repulsive. The noiseless city was flooded with the mellowest light that ever streamed from the moon, and seemed like some living creature wrapped in peaceful slumber. On its further side was a little temple, whose delicate pillars and ornate front glowed with a rich luster that chained the eye like the spell. And nearer by, the palace of the king reared its creamy walls out of the midst of a great garden of shrubbery that was flecked all over with a random shower of amber lights, a spray of golden sparks that lost their brightness in the glory of the moon, and glinted softly upon the sea of dark foliage like the pallid stars of the Milky Way. Overhead the stately columns, majestic still in their ruin, underfoot the dreaming city, in the distance the silver sea. Not on the broad earth is there another picture half so beautiful. As we turned and moved again through the temple, I wished that the illustrious men who had sat in it in the remote ages could visit it again and reveal themselves to our curious eyes. Plato, Aristotle, Demosthenes, Socrates, Phocion, Pythagoras, Euclid, Pindar, Xenophon, Herodotus, Praxiteles and Phidias, Zeuxis the painter. What a constellation of celebrated names! But more than all, I wished that old Diogenes, groping so patiently with his lantern, searching so zealously for one solitary honest man in all the world, might meander along and stumble on our party. I ought not to say it, maybe, but still I suppose he would have put out his light. Commercial morals, especially, are bad. There is no gainsaying that. Greek, Turkish, and Armenian morals consist only in attending church regularly on the appointed Sabbaths, and in breaking the 10 Commandments all the balance of the week. It comes natural to them to lie and cheat in the first place, and then they go on and improve on nature until they arrive at perfection. In recommending his son to a merchant as a valuable salesman, a father does not say he is a nice, moral, upright boy and goes to Sunday school and is honest, but he says, "This boy is worth his weight in broad pieces of 100, for behold, he will cheat whomsoever hath dealings with him, and from the Euxine to the waters of Marmora there abideth not so gifted a liar." How is that for a recommendation? The missionaries tell me that they hear encomiums like that passed upon people every day. They say of a person they admire, "Ah, he is a charming swindler and a most exquisite liar." The newspaper business has its inconveniences in Constantinople. 2 Greek papers and 1 French one were suppressed here within a few days of each other. No victories of the Cretans are allowed to be printed. From time to time, the Grand Vizier sends a notice to the various editors that the Cretan insurrection is entirely suppressed, and although that editor knows better, he still has to print the notice. The Levant Herald is too fond of speaking praisefully of Americans to be popular with the Sultan, who does not relish our sympathy with the Cretans, and therefore that paper has to be particularly circumspect in order to keep out of trouble. Once the editor, forgetting the official notice in his paper that the Cretans were crushed out, printed a letter of a very different tenor from the American consul in Crete and was fined $250 for it. Shortly, he printed another from the same source and was imprisoned 3 months for his pains. I think I could get the assistant editorship of the Levant Herald, but I am going to try to worry along without it. By 6:30, we were underway, and all the Syrian world seemed to be underway also. The road was filled with mule trains and long processions of camels. This reminds me that we have been trying for some time to think what a camel looks like, and now we have made it out. When he is down on all his knees, flat on his breast to receive his load, he looks something like a goose swimming, and when he is upright, he looks like an ostrich with an extra set of legs. Camels are not beautiful, and their long underlip gives them an exceedingly gallus expression. They have immense flat, forked cushions of feet that make a track in the dust like a pie with a slice cut out of it. They are not particular about their diet. They would eat a tombstone if they could bite it. A thistle grows about here which has needles on it that would pierce through leather, I think. If one touches you, you can find relief in nothing but profanity. The camels eat these. They show by their actions that they enjoy them. I suppose it would be a real treat to a camel to have a keg of nails for supper. Noah's tomb is built of stone and is covered with a long stone building. Bakshish let us in. The building had to be long because the grave of the honored old navigator is 210 feet long itself. It is only about 4 feet high, though. He must have cast a shadow like a lightning rod. The proof that this is the genuine spot where Noah was buried can only be doubted by uncommonly incredulous people. The evidence is pretty straight. Shem, the son of Noah, was present at the burial and showed the place to his descendants, who transmitted the knowledge to their descendants, and the lineal descendants of these introduced themselves to us today. It was pleasant to make the acquaintance of members of so respectable a family. It was a thing to be proud of. It was the next thing to being acquainted with Noah himself. Damascus dates back anterior to the days of Abraham and is the oldest city in the world. It was founded by Uz, the grandson of Noah. The early history of Damascus is shrouded in the mists of a hoary antiquity. Leave the matters written of in the first 11 chapters of the Old Testament out, and no recorded event has occurred in the world, but Damascus was in existence to receive the news of it. Go back as far as you will into the vague past, there was always a Damascus. In the writings of every century for more than 4,000 years, its name has been mentioned and its praises sung. To Damascus, years are only moments, decades are only flitting trifles of time. She measures time, not by days and months and years, but by the empires she has seen rise and prosper and crumble to ruin. She is a type of immortality. She saw the foundations of Baalbek and Thebes and Ephesus laid. She saw these villages grow into mighty cities and amaze the world with their grandeur, and she has lived to see them desolate, deserted, and given over to the owls and the bats. She saw the Israelitish empire exalted, and she saw it annihilated. She saw Greece rise and flourish 2,000 years and die. In her old age she saw Rome built. She saw it overshadow the world with its power. She saw it perish. The few hundreds of years of Genoese and Venetian might and splendor were, to grave old Damascus, only a trifling scintillation hardly worth remembering. Damascus has seen all that has ever occurred on earth, and still she lives. She has looked upon the dry bones of 1,000 empires, and will see the tombs of 1,000 more before she dies. Though another claims the name, Old Damascus is by right the eternal city. It seems curious enough to us to be standing on ground that was once actually pressed by the feet of the Savior. The situation is suggestive of a reality and a tangibility that seem at variance with the vagueness and mystery and ghostliness that one naturally attaches to the character of a god. I cannot comprehend yet that I am sitting where a god has stood, and looking upon the brook and the mountains which that god looked upon, and am surrounded by dusky men and women whose ancestors saw him, and even talked with him face to face, and carelessly, just as they would have done with any other stranger. I cannot comprehend this. The gods of my understanding have been always hidden in clouds and very far away. As soon as the tribe found out that we had a doctor in our party, they began to flock in from all quarters. Dr. B, in the charity of his nature, had taken a child from a wagon who sat nearby and put some sort of a wash upon its diseased eyes. That woman went off and started the whole nation, and it was a sight to see them swarm. The lame, the halt, the blind, the leprous, all the distempers that are bred of indolence, dirt, and iniquity were represented in the Congress in 10 minutes, and still they came. Every woman that had a sick baby brought it along, and every woman that hadn't borrowed one. What reverent and what worshipping looks they bent upon that dread, mysterious power, the doctor. They watched him take his phials out. They watched him measure the particles of white powder. They watched him add drops of one precious liquid and drops of another. They lost not the slightest movement. Their eyes were riveted upon him with a fascination that nothing could distract. I believe they thought he was gifted like a god. When each individual got his portion of medicine, his eyes were radiant with joy, notwithstanding by nature they are a thankless and impassive race, and upon his face was written the unquestioning faith that nothing on earth could prevent the patient from getting well now. Christ knew how to preach to these simple, superstitious, disease-tortured creatures. He healed the sick. They flocked to our poor human doctor this morning when the fame of what he had done to the sick child went abroad in the land, and they worshipped him with their eyes, while they did not know as yet whether there was virtue in his simples or not. The ancestors of these people, precisely like them in color, dress, manners, costumes, simplicity, flocked in vast multitudes after Christ, and when they saw him make the afflicted whole with a word, it is no wonder they worshipped him. No wonder his deeds were the talk of the nation. No wonder the multitude that followed him was so great that at one time, 30 miles from here, they had to let a sick man down through the roof, because no approach could be made to the door. No wonder his audiences were so great at Galilee that he had to preach from a ship, removed a little distance from the shore. No wonder that even in the desert places about Bethsaida, 5,000 invaded his solitude, and he had to feed them by a miracle or else see them suffer for their confiding faith and devotion. No wonder, when there was a great commotion in a city in those days, one neighbor explained it to another in words to this effect: "They say that Jesus of Nazareth is come." It is hard to make a choice of the most beautiful passage in a book which is so gemmed with beautiful passages as the Bible, but it is certain that not many things within its lids may take rank above the exquisite story of Joseph, who taught those ancient writers their simplicity of language, their felicity of expression, their pathos, and above all, their faculty of sinking themselves entirely out of sight of the reader and making the narrative stand out alone and seem to tell itself. Shakespeare is always present when one reads his book. Macaulay is present when we follow the march of his stately sentences, but the Old Testament writers are hidden from view. In the starlight, Galilee has no boundaries but the broad compass of the heavens and is a theater meet for great events, meet for the birth of a religion able to save a world, and meet for the stately figure appointed to stand upon its stage and proclaim its high decrees. But in the sunlight, one says, is it for the deeds which were done, and the words which were spoken in this little acre of rocks and sand 18 centuries gone, that the bells are ringing today in the remote islands of the sea and far and wide over continents that clasp the circumference of the huge globe? In Constantinople you ask, how far is it to the consulate? And they answer, about 10 minutes. How far is it to the Lloyd's agency? Quarter of an hour. How far is it to the lower bridge? 4 minutes. I cannot be positive about it, but I think that there, when a man orders a pair of pantaloons, he says he wants them a quarter of a minute in the legs and 9 seconds around the waist. I cannot think of anything now more certain to make one shudder than to have a soft-footed camel sneak up behind him and touch him on the ear with its cold, flabby underlip. A camel did this for one of the boys, who was drooping over his saddle in a brown study. He glanced up and saw the majestic apparition hovering above him and made frantic efforts to get out of the way, but the camel reached out and bit him on the shoulder before he accomplished it. This was the only pleasant incident of the journey. Imagination labors best in distant fields. I doubt if any man can stand in the grotto of the Annunciation and people with the phantom images of his mind, its 2 tangible walls of stone. They showed us a broken granite pillar, depending from the roof, which they said was hacked in 2 by the Moslem conquerors of Nazareth, in the vain hope of pulling down the sanctuary. But the pillar remained miraculously suspended in the air, and unsupported itself, supported then, and still supports the roof. By dividing this statement up among 8, it was found not difficult to believe it. These gifted Latin monks never do anything by halves. If they were to show you the brazen serpent that was elevated in the wilderness, you could depend upon it that they had on hand the pole it was elevated on also, and even the hole it stood in. They have got the grotto of the Annunciation here, and just as convenient to it as one's throat is to his mouth, they have also the Virgin's kitchen and even her sitting room, where she and Joseph watched the infant Savior play with Hebrew toys 1800 years ago. All under one roof, and all clean, spacious, comfortable grottos. It seems curious that personages intimately connected with the Holy Family always lived in grottos, in Nazareth, in Bethlehem, in imperial Ephesus, and yet nobody else in their day and generation thought of doing anything of the kind. If they ever did, their grottos are all gone, and I suppose we ought to wonder at the peculiar marvel of the preservation of these I speak of. When the Virgin fled from Herod's wrath, she hid in a grotto in Bethlehem, and the same is there to this day. The slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem was done in a grotto. The Savior was born in a grotto. Both are shown to pilgrims yet. It is exceedingly strange that these tremendous events all happened in grottos, and exceedingly fortunate, likewise, because the strongest houses must crumble to ruin in time, but a grotto in the living rock will last forever. The tomb of Adam, how touching it was, here in a land of strangers, far away from home and friends and all who cared for me, thus to discover the grave of a blood relation. True, a distant one, but still a relation. The unerring instinct of nature thrilled its recognition. The fountain of my filial affection was stirred to its profoundest depths, and I gave way to tumultuous emotion. I leaned upon a pillar and burst into tears. I deem it no shame to have wept over the grave of my poor dead relative. Let him who would sneer at my emotion close this volume here, for he will find little to his taste in my journeyings through the Holy Land. Noble old man, he did not live to see me, he did not live to see his child. And I, alas, I did not live to see him. Weighed down by sorrow and disappointment, he died before I was born, 6,000 brief summers before I was born. But let us try to bear it with fortitude. Let us trust that he is better off where he is. let us take comfort in the thought that his loss is our eternal gain. And so we came at last to another wonder, of deep and abiding interest, the veritable house where the unhappy wretch once lived, who has been celebrated in song and story for more than 1800 years as the Wandering Jew. On the memorable day of the crucifixion, he stood in this old doorway with his arms akimbo, looking out upon the struggling mob that was approaching, and when the weary Saviour would have sat down and rested him a moment, pushed him rudely away and said, "Move on." The Lord said, "Move on, thou likewise," and the command has never been revoked from that day to this. All men know now that the miscreant upon whose head that just curse fell has roamed up and down the wide world, for ages and ages, seeking rest and never finding it, courting death but always in vain, longing to stop, in city, in wilderness, in desert solitudes, yet hearing always that relentless warning to march, march on. They say, do these hoary traditions, that when Titus sacked Jerusalem and slaughtered 1,100,000 Jews in her streets and byways, the wandering Jew was seen always in the thickest of the fight, and that when battle axes gleamed in the air, he bowed his head beneath them. When swords flashed their deadly lightnings, he sprang in their way. He bared his breast to whizzing javelins, to hissing arrows, to any and to every weapon that promised death and forgetfulness and rest. But it was useless. He walked forth out of the carnage without a wound. And it is said that 500 years afterwards, he followed Mahomet when he carried destruction to the cities of Arabia, and then turned against him, hoping in this way to win the death of a traitor. His calculations were wrong again. No quarter was given to any living creature but one, and that was the only one of all the host that did not want it. He sought death 500 years later in the wars of the Crusades and offered himself to famine and pestilence at Ascalon. He escaped again. He could not die. These repeated annoyances could have at last but one effect: they shook his confidence. Since then, the wandering Jew has carried on a kind of desultory toying with the most promising of the aids and implements of destruction, but with small hope, as a general thing. He has speculated some in cholera and railroads, and has taken almost a lively interest in infernal machines and patent medicines. He is old now and grave, as becomes an age like his. He indulges in no light amusement save that he goes sometimes to executions and is fond of funerals. We had had a glimpse from a mountain top of the Dead Sea, lying like a blue shield in the plain of the Jordan, and now we were marching down a close, flaming, rugged, desolate defile where no living creature could enjoy life, except, perhaps, a salamander. It was such a dreary, repulsive, horrible solitude. It was the wilderness where John preached, with camel's hair about his loins, raiment enough, but he never could have got his locusts and wild honey here. We were moping along down through this dreadful place, every man in the rear. Our guards, two gorgeous young Arab sheiks, with cargoes of swords, guns, pistols, and daggers on board, were loafing ahead. Bedouins. Every man shrunk up and disappeared in his clothes like a mud turtle. My first impulse was to dash forward and destroy the Bedouins. My second was to dash to the rear to see if there were any coming in that direction. I acted on the latter impulse. So did all the others. If any Bedouins had approached us, then, from that point of compass, they would have paid dearly for their rashness. We all remarked that afterwards. There would have been scenes of riot and bloodshed there that no pen could describe. I know that because each man told what he would have done, individually, and such a medley of strange and unheard-of inventions of cruelty you could not conceive of. One man said he had calmly made up his mind to perish where he stood, if need be, but never yield an inch. He was going to wait, with deadly patience, till he could count the stripes on the first Bedouin's jacket, and then count them and let him have it. Another was going to sit still till the first lance reached within an inch of his breast, and then dodge it and seize it. I forbear to tell what he was going to do to that Bedouin that owned it. It makes my blood run cold to think of it. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Over it broods the spell of a curse that has withered its fields and fettered its energies. Where Sodom and Gomorrah reared their domes and towers, that solemn sea now floods the plain, in whose bitter waters no living thing exists, over whose waveless surface the blistering air hangs motionless and dead, about whose borders nothing grows but weeds and scattering tufts of cane, and that treacherous fruit that promises refreshment to parching lips, but turns to ashes at the touch. Nazareth is forlorn, about that ford of Jordan where the hosts of Israel entered the promised land with songs of rejoicing. One finds only a squalid camp of fantastic Bedouins of the desert. Jericho the accursed lies a moldering ruin today, even as Joshua's miracle left it more than 3,000 years ago. Bethlehem and Bethany, in their poverty and their humiliation, have nothing about them now to remind one that they once knew the high honor of the Savior's presence, the hallowed spot where the shepherds watched their flocks by night, and where the angels sang, "Peace on earth, goodwill to men," is untenanted by any living creature, and unblessed by any feature that is pleasant to the eye. Renowned Jerusalem itself, the stateliest name in history, has lost all its ancient grandeur, and is become a pauper village. The riches of Solomon are no longer there to compel the admiration of visiting Oriental queens. The wonderful temple, which was the pride and glory of Israel, is gone, and the Ottoman crescent is lifted above the spot where, on that most memorable day in the annals of the world, they reared the Holy Cross. The noted Sea of Galilee, where Roman fleets once rode at anchor and the disciples of the Savior sailed in their ships, was long ago deserted by the devotees of war and commerce, and its borders are a silent wilderness. Capernaum is a shapeless ruin. Magdala is the home of beggared. Arabs, Bethsaida and Chorazin have vanished from the earth, and the desert places round about them, where thousands of men once listened to the Savior's voice and ate the miraculous bread, sleep in the hush of a solitude that is inhabited only by birds of prey and skulking foxes. Palestine is desolate and unlovely, and why should it be otherwise? Can the curse of the deity beautify a land? After years of waiting, it was before me at last. The great face was so sad, so earnest, so longing, so patient. There was a dignity not of earth in its mien, and in its countenance a benignity such as never anything human wore. It was stone, but seemed sentient. If ever image of stone thought, it was thinking. It was looking toward the verge of the landscape, yet looking at nothing, nothing but distance and vacancy. It was looking over and beyond everything of the present and far into the past. It was gazing out over the ocean of time, over lines of century waves, which, further and further receding, closed nearer and nearer together, and blended at last into one unbroken tide, away toward the horizon of remote antiquity. It was thinking of the wars of departed ages, of the empires it had seen created and destroyed, of the nations whose birth it had witnessed, whose progress it had watched, whose annihilation it had noted, of the joy and sorrow, the life and death, the grandeur and decay of 5,000 slow revolving years. It was the type of an attribute of man, of a faculty of his heart and brain. It was memory, retrospection, wrought into visible, tangible form. All who know what pathos there is in memories of days that are accomplished and faces that have vanished, albeit only a trifling score of years gone by, will have some appreciation of the pathos that dwells in these grave eyes that look so steadfastly back upon the things they knew before history was born, before tradition had being, things that were, and forms that moved, in a vague era which even poetry and romance scarce know of, and passed one by one away and left the stony dreamer solitary in the midst of a strange new age and uncomprehended scenes. The Sphinx is grand in its loneliness. It is imposing in its magnitude. It is impressive in the mystery that hangs over its story. And there is that, in the overshadowing majesty of this eternal figure of stone, with its accusing memory of the deeds of all ages, which reveals to one something of what he shall feel when he shall stand at last in the awful presence of God. We shall remember something of pleasant France, and something also of Paris, though it flashed upon us as splendid meteor and was gone again, we hardly knew how or where. We shall remember, always, how we saw majestic Gibraltar glorified with the rich coloring of a Spanish sunset and swimming in a sea of rainbows. In fancy we shall see Milan again, and her stately cathedral with its marble wilderness of graceful spires, and Padua, Verona, Como, jeweled with stars, and patrician Venice, afloat on her stagnant flood, silent, desolate, haughty, scornful of her humbled state, wrapping herself in memories of her lost fleets, of battle and triumph, and all the pageantry of a glory that is departed. We cannot forget Florence, Naples, nor the foretaste of heaven that is in the delicious atmosphere of Greece, and surely not Athens and the broken temples of the Acropolis. Surely not venerable Rome, nor the green plain that compasses her round about, contrasting its brightness with her grey decay, nor the ruined arches that stand apart in the plain and clothe their looped and windowed raggedness with vines. We shall remember St. Peter's, not as one sees it when he walks the streets of Rome and fancies all her domes are just alike, but as he sees it leagues away, when every meaner edifice has faded out of sight, and that one dome looms superbly up in the flush of sunset, full of dignity and grace, strongly outlined as a mountain. We shall remember Constantinople and the Bosporus, the colossal magnificence of Baalbek, the pyramids of Egypt, the prodigious form, the benignant countenance of the Sphinx, Oriental Smyrna, sacred Jerusalem, Damascus, the pearl of the East, the pride of Syria, the fabled Garden of Eden, the home of princes and genii of the Arabian Nights, the oldest metropolis on the earth, the one city in all the world that has kept its name and held its place, and looked serenely on while the kingdoms and empires of 4,000 years have risen to life, enjoyed their little season of pride and pomp, and then vanished and been forgotten.